All right, we are recording. We're ready to go.
Okay, thanks so much, Katie, and thanks everyone for joining us. So tonight we're going to talk about sleep strategies. I'm Abigail Bunt, and this is Alison Moser. I'm the co-founder and executive clinical director of MeBe, and Alison is one of our wonderful clinical supervisors. Okay, so just to give you a little bit about MeBe, MeBe is about being me. Our mission is to empower families, professionals, and communities by educating and training them on evidence-based approaches to improve the quality of life for those who they love and serve, so every individual may achieve their maximum potential to operate a sustainable business model where clients, employees, and partners of all diverse backgrounds are welcomed and valued, and to foster an engaging environment where employees are motivated, recognized for excellence, and encouraged to cheer each other on. Okay, so the services that we provide are applied behavior analysis, or ABA therapy, occupational therapy, speech language therapy. We're really excited that we're starting to get our social skills groups up and running again, feeding therapy, and we do offer telehealth for some of these services. Locations, so we provide services throughout the San Diego, Seattle, Los Angeles, Bay Area, Austin, Denver, and Phoenix metro areas, and we're coming soon to the Northern Virginia area. Okay, if you want to follow us, we are on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and our contact information is there. And before we get started, I'll just say I am a mom of 3 kids, 5 and under, and all of them sleep through the night. I'm not saying that to make anyone jealous. I'm sharing that so that you guys have confidence that everything that Alison's about to share does actually work if you can follow it.
Okay, so I'll just jump in. So today's topics, we're going to talk about what is considered healthy sleep and unhealthy sleep, identify the different areas of sleep issues, and then identify some helpful strategies to combat these issues. So we'll just jump right in. So what is considered healthy sleep? There's 4 main criteria, and just to preface this is based on decades of research. These are kind of what medical professionals and behavioral professionals agree is what considered healthy sleep. So falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes of our head hitting the pillow is ideal. Staying asleep for the majority of the night. It's normal to wake up a couple of times a night, but it should be just enough where you kind of roll over, check your phone, and go back to sleep. And then waking fairly easily in the morning. And what that means is we're not hitting our snooze button 10 to 15 times. For our children, it might be they're not overly fussy when they wake up or having meltdowns or really fighting waking up. And then feeling rested throughout the day. So we have little normal slumps in energy, but we should be able to get through our tasks for the day and not really rely heavily on caffeine and sugar to get through. So how common are sleep problems in children? Very common, actually. 35 to 50% of young children are reported to have sleep issues. And of that, 63 to 73% of autistic children are reported to have sleep issues. So why are these percentages so different? I think a lot of what we see with our families is that they've kind of accepted that having poor sleep behaviors are just part of autism, and that's not the case. This is a behavioral kind of issue, and we address it from a behavioral standpoint, and we'll talk more about the strategies later on. And also a myth that we hear a lot is that I just have a bad sleeper, and that's not the case. So we'll talk more about that. Before we kind of jump into some strategies and some areas of concern, this is kind of the big tool that we use for how much our kids should be sleeping based on their age. As you notice, right around 4, that's when our naps should be fading out. I know a lot of families like to cling to naps because it's sometimes the only time we get a break during the day, but it's only going to further inhibit their sleep during the nighttime. So really fading out and making sure that they're getting enough sleep and you're not expecting them to be in bed too much. So we'll reference this quite a bit. So identifying what is the problem area. From our standpoint, when I go into a home and I start working on a sleep training program, I start with this assessment tool. It's called the Sleep Assessment and Treatment Tool, and it's developed by this PhD in our field called Greg Hanley. He's kind of the pioneer of the sleep training protocol and the strategies that we're going to talk to. And this is the interview that I always use. It's very lengthy. It's kind of a big tell. But it breaks down all of the different areas of sleep problems, and then it helps you kind of develop a plan to address it. So there's 5 different areas, and we'll talk about that. But you can also search this on Google, sleep assessment and treatment tool, Greg Hanley, and it's one of the first things that pop up, and you can use it to kind of guide what you want to do with your child. But again, it's very lengthy, but it's a lot of really good information. So what is the problem? So does your child have a hard time completing a bedtime routine? We call this nighttime routine non-compliance. So do they have a lot of whining at bedtime? Do they have meltdowns or tantrums? Do they run away from you a lot thinking it's a game and it just takes them forever to start that bedtime routine? We'll talk more about all of these. Does your child engage in some disruptive behaviors that keep him or her from falling asleep? So are they getting out of bed a lot? Are they playing with toys in bed? We call this sleep interfering behaviors. It's literally preventing them from falling asleep because they're occupied with something else. Do they insist on having a parent with them to fall asleep, or a screen like an iPad? We call this irregular sleep dependencies. And again, we'll talk more about all of these in detail. Does your child wake up frequently throughout the night? We call this nighttime awakening. So getting out of bed, turning the TV on, maybe going to get a snack. Does your child wake up early every day? Kids typically wake up pretty early, but if they're not getting enough sleep based on that chart I just showed, then that's when it becomes an area of concern. And then does your child take a long time to fall asleep? We call this delayed sleep onset. And I think this is one of the most common areas I see when we're working with families, is it takes a long time for their child to fall asleep. So the strategies that we have kind of put together are kind of broken up into basic strategies, which I'll go over first. They're just as important, but they're easily accessible if you search sleep training on Google. We'll talk a little bit about them, and then we'll kind of get into more behavioral interventions that are a little bit more intense, but we'll start with these. So having consistent bedtime and wake up times, even on the weekends. It's really tempting to let your child fall asleep and just kind of wake up really, really late. But if they're typically getting up between 7 and 7:30 during the week, trying to keep it as consistent on the weekends and holidays will only help promote better sleep later on, even though it's really tempting. Avoiding sugary snacks well before bedtime. Sometimes if dinner time and bedtime are really close together and you're a household that uses dessert after dinner, sometimes that can really affect how long your child takes to fall asleep. And then sometimes I've been surprised looking at kids' snacks. Sometimes there's caffeine hidden inside them. So just being really, really, really cognizant of that. Especially if your child likes to play with toys in their bed and they're not falling asleep, having those really, really engaging toys and activities put away, and they can have access to it to the next day. And then putting your child to bed when he or she is tired. So we'll talk a little bit about that. This is called the forbidden zone. And what it is, this is how our alertness works with adults and children, where we wake up and we feel pretty alert. And then right around lunchtime, I know that's for me, it's right around lunchtime, I feel this like dip in my energy. And I convinced myself that I could probably take a nap, but I eat lunch and then I kind of get a little bit of burst of energy and I feel good. But then when I get home, I get even more energy and I start doing all my chores, and I get really productive when I get home from work after a long day. Kids are kind of the same way. And sometimes I've found that we're putting kids to bed during this forbidden zone, and that's why they're not falling asleep, because they're just not tired. One way you can kind of figure out if you're putting your child to bed during this little forbidden zone is just by keeping track of how long it's taking them to fall asleep. I recommend taking data on when you put your child to sleep and how long it takes for them to fall asleep, and over the course of weeks. We start with 2 weeks, but I always try to recommend at least 1 month of just writing down those times and then kind of coming up with an average and seeing, like, you know what, it takes my child about an hour to fall asleep every day, and they're not really sitting in bed playing like with toys and stuff. They're like actually laying down and they're just not falling asleep. They might not be tired, and maybe their bedtime needs to be adjusted a little bit. So taking lots of data is going to be really, really helpful for a lot of these, but definitely for this, because I see this a lot with our kids, is they're just not tired when they're being put to sleep. A couple more basic strategies to help with bedtime and sleep: having comfortable clothing and bedding. I have kids I've worked with in the past where really routinely they'll go to bed with pajamas, and then sometime throughout the night they kick off all of their bedding and all of their clothing. So it might indicate that they're just getting really, really hot. So sometimes if that's happening with your child, maybe switching up the bedding, switching up the clothing might be helpful. I know a lot of the kids that we work with have some sensory integration and processing issues. So, not having something that's too thick or too scratchy. And then I've included a couple of visuals that are just basic ones I found on Google, but they're really, really helpful. Having a really, really routine down and having the same routine every single day for bedtime is really, really helpful. I find it's actually more helpful for the parents because it's keeping them on track of what the order of the activities is, just as helpful as it is for the kids to see, okay, right now I'm putting on pajamas. I don't really like to put on pajamas, but I know later on I get to see I'm doing my favorite thing, which is reading books. So kind of having all those activities is really, really helpful, having it laid out. And again, there's tons of these on the internet and you can even make one. There's tons. Sometimes kids like to help make them. They like to help pick the order. And kind of talking about the order, there's a lot of research to show that if you start with the more active activities kind of earlier on in the routine and then slowly fade to more calmer, more passive activities, it is really helpful in helping them fall asleep within a good amount of time, that 10 to 15 minute window that we've talked about. So like if you have a child that really fights putting on pajamas, put that earlier on in the routine. So that way you have lots of time for them to calm down after the fact. And also TV's okay. Lots of my families like to use screen time in bedtime routine. I just suggest doing it a little bit earlier. So that way they're not too, overly stimulated. But yeah, I would say just include it, especially if it's something that they enjoy. Just put it on earlier in the routine. It's totally okay. And then strategies to help keep your child in bed. So we talked a little bit earlier about problems with sleep, but the different areas, and one of them is irregular sleep dependencies. So basically a sleep dependency is whatever is in bed with them or in their environment needs to be able to stay with them in that environment throughout the entire night. And it's something that should also be taken on vacation. So an appropriate sleep dependency, an example, like a water bottle, a teddy bear, a favorite blanket. Some families use like white noise machines or like calm music. Those you can have on throughout the entire night, or they're accessible all throughout the night. So if they do wake up, they see, oh, I still have my teddy bear, I still have my blanket, life is good, everything's as it should be, I fall back asleep. An irregular or an inappropriate sleep dependency is like insisting on mom and dad being with you when you fall asleep, or having the TV on or the iPad. The reason why that these are really tricky and really, really promote unhealthy sleep is that we talked about when we wake up during the night, that healthy amount of just wake up for a minute or two and roll back up to bed. With our kids, if they're dependent on mom and dad being in bed with them, when they wake up in the middle of the night and they see that mom and dad, or they know instantly mom or dad is not with me, it almost triggers their body to fully awake to go find mom and dad. And that's when they start coming into your bed, trying to go hunt on for the iPad or whatever. So making sure that we have really, really appropriate sleep dependencies, and we're trying to fade those inappropriate ones. And we'll talk a lot about how we can fade that out, because this is one of the more challenging strategies that or the more challenging areas that we have to work with. So we'll talk more about that. So before we kind of get into the hard stuff, there's a lot of things that we need to consider. So we talked a little bit already about keeping a log of all your sleep behaviors for your child. I recommend at least a month if you can. Some families do 2 weeks. And again, tracking when they or when you put them to bed, how long it takes for them to fall asleep, how many times they're waking up during the night, and what time they're waking up in the morning. So there's 4 criteria I have my families take data on. And then that helps us drive what our plan is going to be. And we'll talk more about that. When you are ready to pick a weekend or you're ready to start sleep training, plan accordingly. Kind of like potty training, we typically will pick a weekend and that's the only thing we're focusing on. We're not going anywhere. We don't have anywhere to be. We're just going to knock this out over the weekend. Sleep training is the same way. I suggest starting on a Friday. If you can wait till a holiday where the kids are out of school more and you're maybe have less load at work, that's the best, because sleep training is very hard. It's very difficult. and everybody's going to be tired for a couple of days at least. So just making sure that you don't have a lot of stuff going on. And then for some families who are lucky enough to have a scheduled nap for themselves the next day, so like one parent will take like a 2-hour nap and then the other parent will take a 2-hour nap. So that way they're ready to go when it's time to do sleep training at night. If you can do that, that's great too. And be prepared for tears, meltdowns, hard nights. The first couple of days are going to be pretty rough. It's very, very common. We're trying a lot of new stuff. We're putting new expectations on your child. It's very, 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 very difficult and lots of emotions. So just be really, really cognizant that that's going to happen and be prepared for it. But the good thing is, if you're consistent with your plan, you're doing it the same way every single night, those behaviors are going to get better. Research shows consistency is what's going to kind of get you through to the other side. So you just have to kind of grin and bear it for a couple of days, maybe 3 or 4, and then it will get better. And a couple of other things to consider. They need to be, these strategies that we're going to talk about, they need to be implemented the same exact way every single night. Sometimes we get a little fatigued by day 3 because we're not sleeping a whole lot. And so day 3, we kind of slip up a little bit and we allow the kid to get out of bed for a little bit longer, or we let them just come in our bed because we're just so tired, and it sets everything back and you have to start back at day 1. So it's just better to prepare yourself before and just realize that you're going to probably have to drink lots of coffee for the next few days and just be a little tired, but it'll get better. It always does. That's how the research shows. As long as there's consistency, it will get better.
I haven't chimed in too much because Allison's doing an amazing job. But one thing that I would say is when you're like, assess your own performance and be really honest with yourself. So did you tweak that procedure a little bit because you thought you were on track and you could change something early before it was recommended or before you planned to? Or was it just the tears were killing you and you gave in that one time? Be really, really honest with yourself, because even giving in that one time, if it's that your kid gets up and comes out of bed and asks for a glass of water and then a hug and then this and that, or needs you to fall asleep, giving in just once, I'll say what Dr. Hanley always says, that's keeping hope alive. And it's going to keep that behavior that you don't want going. Because even though you did it just that one time, and you didn't do it the other 5 times in a row, you just gave your kid hope that you're going to do it again, that they're going to get their way again, even though they didn't get their way 5 times in a row. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to consider. And we do this a lot in ABA because we work with a lot of clients that do have, some tantrum behavior. And a lot of the kids that I work with, usually when they're having a tantrum, it's because they're trying to gain access to something because they really want that candy or they really want that toy, but they didn't do what they needed to do first. And, it's the same thing. Like if they learn 1 time out of 10 that like, oh, you know what, that tantrum did work, then they're going to try another 10 times to see if maybe one of those times I'm going to get what I want. So just being super consistent every single time is really important. It's hard, but it's going to get us to the other side.
And Allison, I'm just jumping real quick. We did have a question come through the chat box.
Sure.
They were asking about chewy tubes. Are chewy tubes okay to bring to bed?
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think it depends on if they're engaging with the chewy so much that you feel like it's keeping them awake. But we have a lot of clients that have sensory toys for their mouths, as long as it's not a safety concern of it being in the bed with them or near the bed, it should be fine. But again, really take that data look, is like, okay, you know what, I'm noticing that he's, using the chewy for a little bit, but then he gets all the way up and starts playing with other things in his room, then maybe we need to kind of reevaluate. So just really look at what's happening, but it should be okay. All right, so what to do if my child needs me to fall asleep? So this is kind of like that irregular, inappropriate sleep dependency. So when your child is in bed, you're putting them to bed, you decided I'm gonna start sleep training, this is day 1. I have my plan, I'm ready to go. So when you're putting them to bed, it's okay to spend a little bit of time with your child in bed. This is a great time to read books, cuddle a little bit, talk about your day. We don't want to spend too much time in bed because I have seen that happen where it's a little bit too much time and then the kid falls asleep. And so we kind of have to make sure that they're awake and not so tired that they're going to fall asleep while we're reading books. So just be really cognizant of that. Set a time limit if you need to. I have some families that do 10 minutes. I have some that can do 20. It's just really up to you and what you think you can do. When it's time to bid your child goodnight, you give them a kiss, you tuck them in, and you leave the room. And then this is where it's going to get really tricky, and we'll talk a lot about how we can plan for this. So once you leave the room, especially if your child likes to get out and come find you, you wait a few seconds or minutes, depending on what your child can handle, and then you come back in and you give them a kiss and you bid them a good night. So for instance, I've had some clients who can handle their parents being outside of the room for a couple of minutes before they start to go find them or calling out. So if I have a kid that can tolerate 2 minutes, I'll start at 1 minute. I want to set them up for success. So I want to make it easy, especially that first night. And so what they might do is they'll come and they'll visit after 1 minute, say goodnight, give them a kiss, give them a hug, tuck them in, and then they leave again. And then this time they're increasing that time just a little bit. This time they might come back in 3 minutes. And then they come back, they do the whole thing over again. They tuck them in, give them a kiss, goodnight, leave. And then maybe this time they're going to wait 6 minutes, and you slowly increase that time. I have some families, some kids where they can't even tolerate the parent being out of the room for 20 seconds. So we start at 10 and then we slowly build up over time. It takes a lot of time, especially those first couple of nights. It's a lot. I think that this is something that's going to be really important in your planning stage, is to figure out what your child can handle and where you're going to start. So, and also you want to increase those times in between the visits. And the goal is to kind of get in there before you think that they're going to come out. So we're trying to set them up for success. So for instance, maybe for the first night, if you have a child who you think can tolerate a minute, you can start at 30 seconds, come back, give them a kiss, then you leave again. You come back at a minute 15 or a minute 30, and then you come back, give them a kiss, you leave, and then this time maybe you're gonna wait 4 minutes, and then you come back, and you increase that time until they fall asleep. And then the next night, depending on how they did day one, on day two, maybe instead of coming in at a minute or 30 seconds, whatever you did day one, maybe now you're gonna try 2 minutes for that first visit. So the goal is to slowly, over time, fade how long and how much you're visiting. So the goal is to not have to visit at all, and it just takes a little bit of time. I also have had some families where the kid can't tolerate the parents even leaving the room. So we do the time-based visiting. That's what we call this in ABA, is time-based visiting. And they do it inside the room, but they might, instead of leaving the room, they're fading a couple of feet from the bed, and then they work all the way up into like the doorway. And I've read about some cases where day one, the goal is that the parents are in the doorway and the kid can fall asleep with like their eyes on mom and dad. And then the next night, maybe they're out in the hallway and then slowly fade. It's a very slow process. And again, that's why I'm stressing that the planning phase is really, really important, because it might be a couple of days where you're writing down like mock schedules and you're just kind of reviewing them. And then once you implement them, then you can kind of see like, okay, this didn't really work this way, so maybe I need to start at 1 minute instead of 2 minutes. And but planning is really, really important.
I would add really quick, you can throw in some antecedent strategies. Like if you're going to do the hug and kiss goodnight, similar to when you drop your kid off at preschool for the first time, or the first week or 2 weeks, whatever it takes, you let them know, when we get there, we're going to do a hug and a kiss and say goodbye, but I'm not going to go in with you. So you can prime them for that too. When it's time to say goodnight, I'm going to give you a kiss. I'm going to tuck you in and say goodnight, but I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to fall asleep with you, to kind of prime them for what's going to happen.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback off of that, I've had one kid in particular had a really, really hard time being separated from mom. And we kind of we hypothesized that there might be a little bit of separation anxiety. And so she would tell him when she would leave the room, I will be coming back, but you need to stay in bed because you need to fall asleep in your bed. I'm not going to fall asleep with you, but I will be back. And that kind of helped keep him in his bed. I wouldn't recommend coming out the gate with that strategy, but if you feel like your kid can't tolerate you leaving the room, you can explain to them, just keep it short and sweet. And again, don't spend a lot of time in the room itself once you're implementing the strategy. Another thing too you can do is, especially if you think your child's a little attached, especially at bedtime, is if you hear them call out and you're afraid that if you ignore the calling out, that they're going to come find you, you can tell them from the other side of the house, I'll be back, stay in bed, good job waiting. I'll come find you in a little bit, and keep it at that. You don't want to continue a conversation, because if you're engaging in a conversation with them, they're not trying to fall asleep. So just keep it short and sweet. But again, you can prime them a little bit, but again, don't start with those strategies. Only use them if you feel like you really, really need to. And if day one goes really poorly, you can maybe try that for day two. Just keep that in mind, that it's not something that I would recommend for everybody. What to do if your child gets out of bed throughout the night. And this will happen. This happens all the time. So if your child leaves the bed, just prepare to bring them back to their bed as many times as it takes. Try to be as neutral as possible. You can tuck them in, give them a good night kiss, and then leave. Be prepared to do this a lot. The first couple of nights, you might have to do this 10 or 20 times, and every single time they're going to be more upset. This is where the tears really come in, and they might be a little inconsolable, but just try to be as neutral as possible. You can even empathize with them for a little bit. I know this is hard, but this is what we need to do. You need to sleep in your bed. Mom's tired. I need you to sleep. So just keep it really neutral if you can, and bring them back every single time. And they might fight you a little bit more each time because they're just getting more upset. Just be prepared. If you hear them getting out of bed and you're on the other side of the house, just take a deep breath and be ready, and just follow the process. They will eventually fall asleep. It may take them a while. It may take them an hour or 2 hours that first night, and then the next night it might take an hour, and then 30 minutes. It's really exhausting, but as long as, again, you stick to that plan and you do not let them stay out of bed, it will get better. It just absolutely will. That's what research shows very consistently. Again, as long as we're following the plan. So what to do if your child takes a long time to fall asleep? And again, some of these areas, you might have problems with your child across all of these areas. Some may only have a problem with one area. What we do is, if your child takes a long time to fall asleep, you set a goal bedtime. So like, my goal is to have them in bed and asleep by 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock or whatever. Just have that in mind in your planning stage. That's your goal. And again, referencing that chart we talked about earlier, making sure that you're expecting them to be asleep for the appropriate amount for their age is going to be really important. So if you're seeing, because you've taken all this data before in your planning stage, that it's taking about 30 to 45 minutes every single day for your child to fall asleep, when you start day one of sleep training, you're going to put them to bed way later than what your goal bedtime is. So for example, and we'll go a little more in depth with this too, I'll provide more examples. But if you put your child to bed at 7 and they typically fall asleep around 7:40, I would actually even suggest starting day one at 8 o'clock, not 7:45, like 8 or 8:15. You want them to be really tired. Sleep needs to be valuable and motivating because they're tired. And so we're going to set ourselves up for success right out the gate. We're going to make sure that they're super tired. And then referencing back to that healthy sleep criteria, if on day one you put them to bed at 8 or 8:15 and they fall asleep within 10 to 15 minutes of their head hitting their pillow, then the next night you can shift that bedtime back by 15 minutes and continue this process. So for example, you have a goal bedtime of 7 o'clock. You start in, it takes 30 to 45 minutes for your child to fall asleep. So day one, you start at 8 o'clock. It goes great. They fall asleep within 10 to 15 minutes. So day two, you're going to set that bedtime back to 7:45 and say it goes really well. They fall asleep within 10 to 15 minutes, doing great. Day three, you're at 7:30. The goal is 7:30. You're getting closer and closer to that goal bedtime of 7. You start at 7:30, but tonight, the day three, for some reason, it takes them 30 minutes to fall asleep. So what you're going to do is on day 4, you're not going to push that bedtime back. You can either stay at 7:30 or you can push it to 7:45. But I wouldn't recommend, and again, the research shows, don't fade that bedtime too fast. They will let you know. We really want to look at that 10 to 15 minute criteria. If they're not falling asleep in that window, keep the bedtime where it's at, or even push it a little bit later. So again, data is going to be very, very helpful for that too. And then what to do if my child wakes early. There's luckily most kids that wake up early have issues across the other areas that we've discussed. And if you address those areas, this resolves naturally. This is what I've seen with my kids that I've worked with, is that once we've addressed those sleep time, like those irregular sleep dependencies, or the falling asleep taking forever to fall asleep. Once you have addressed all of those things, they just start to naturally wake up at a more appropriate time. But something you can do, depending on your child's age and like safety concerns and all of that, you can teach them that there are certain activities that they can do that are quiet, so it doesn't wake up other people in the house. So like this could be like a time where like, okay, well, you get dressed, and if nobody else is awake, you can have a little bit of time with your iPad before everybody wakes up. I know Abby was discussing earlier that your children have like the light. Is it the?
Yeah, we have like an owl light, and so it's a night light. It doesn't stay on all night. It's like on a timer, and then when it goes off, that's fine. But if they do wake up during the night and like need that for comfort or whatever, they can turn it on, just like a button on the bottom. I'm sure it's on Amazon.
Yeah, a lot of our families use stuff like that, and it's really helpful. And the kids, they pick it up really quick.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alison. I thought you were asking about the owl light, but yeah, we have a lamp.
Oh yeah,
we have a lot of lights in my house regarding sleep. We have a lamp, and it's set to turn on at 6:45. So if they wake up before 6:45, they have to stay in their room just quietly. They have books, and until the lamp comes on. And then when the lamp comes on, they can watch their iPad until my husband and I wake up, which is only at 7. It's only 15 minutes, but it's really helpful, that they know those things that they can access.
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of came up with like an example scenario. So now that we have kind of a little bit more knowledge about what the areas of sleep that are considered problems and a little bit of strategies that we could do, I'll kind of read through this, and I want you to start thinking in your mind about what you would recommend or what you might try with this child, and then we'll go through it. So Harry, who's 8 years old, has difficulty going to sleep each night. His bedtime is usually around 8. He is generally happy until it's time to put on his pajamas, and then he will whine. Sometimes to reduce stress, he's allowed to stay in his existing clothes, so he's not being asked to put on pajamas some nights. He insists on having mom with him at night when he falls asleep, and she'll typically watch videos with him on his iPad and rub his back. Once he falls asleep, about an hour later, she removes the iPad, puts it on the charger, and leaves the room. So typically, Harry will wake up around 11:30 or midnight and come to mom's room and crawl into bed with her. Depending on how tired mom is, she may bring him back to bed and lay with him until he falls back asleep, or just lets him stay in her bed. He has to wake up for school at 7 a.m., but mom usually lets him sleep until the last minute before she has to get him ready. And on the weekends, she lets him wake up naturally, and this can be anywhere from 7:30 to 10 a.m. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. We'll kind of talk about kind of the problems first, and then what I would recommend for sleep training. So he's 8 years old. We know that he does not need to nap. That's been faded out. That's right around 4, so he's good. His bedtime's at 8 p.m. and then he starts whining when it's time to put on his pajamas. So we call this nighttime routine noncompliance. We talked about it earlier based on that assessment that I showed you. So he starts whining during pajamas, and then sometimes he doesn't have to do it, and sometimes he does. It's just gonna create a condition where he will just whine more because he's like, maybe this time I'll be able to stay in my clothes. So just being very consistent. Again, build in that bedtime routine. If he really doesn't like pajamas and it makes him a little emotional and he gets a little ramped up, do it first things first, and then you can have like a preferred activity after. And then kind of looking through, he has a really hard time with falling asleep. It takes about an hour. That's a long time. And he also has a couple of irregular or inappropriate sleep dependencies. So one of them is the iPad. He needs it on and going to fall asleep. He falls asleep to videos and has to have mom with him. And then he wakes up at 11:30, which again, that's normal, but because the iPad's gone, mom's gone, his body is making him wake all the way up to come find her. And then there's also a very inconsistent response from mom. Sometimes he can just stay in bed with her. Sometimes she brings him back, but then again, makes him or gets into bed with him and lets him fall asleep with her. So that's that irregular sleep dependency. And then the inconsistent wake up times. So we kind of talked about that earlier on. Especially with sleep training, your child's going to be very tired. So making sure that you have still that consistent wake up time. So even if he didn't fall asleep till 11 o'clock and he got up a lot, still expect him to wake up between 7 and 7:30. Do not let him sleep in till 10 a.m. because that's just going to throw his sleep behaviors off even more. It's really hard, especially during sleep training, because our children are really tired and they might be really emotional throughout the day and kind of crabby. Don't let them nap, especially when you don't have naps for them regularly and they're too old for naps. Don't let them nap. They need to be tired when it's time to go to bed at night. So just, it's really hard, but keep them awake. And then have those consistent wake up times. So some strategies, more strategies that I would recommend for her would be tightening up that routine, maybe make a visual, put the pajamas in the beginning, maybe he can have iPad after. So it's like contingent on you put your pajamas on first, then you can have iPad for a little bit and I'll cuddle with you. And then remove the iPad, you can have it tomorrow, but we can do books now. If you want to spend some time with me, that's fine. Build it into the routine. And then I would implement the time-based waiting. So if he does not tolerate her being out of the room for even a minute or two, we'll start there. And then that first visit, she'll come in, tuck him in, say goodnight, give him a kiss, leave for a minute, come back in 3 minutes, do the same thing. And then maybe that third visit will be 6 minutes or 7 minutes, depending on what our plan is. And if he gets out of bed, bring him right back as many times as he does, as many times as he gets out of bed. An additional strategy that I would recommend is starting that bedtime routine later. So if he typically goes to bed at 8, that's a really good goal bedtime. But for sleep training, I would probably recommend 9 or 9:15 for his bedtime, and then fade it over the course of the days, depending on how well he does. But yeah, the time-based visiting and bringing bringing him back to bed will be the biggest strategies and probably the most intense. And he might, get up out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and crawl into mom's bed. Mom needs to bring him back. It's really exhausting. It's tiring, but being consistent, that behavior will go away. It will stop. It just takes a lot of intense practice and calling on a lot of patience, but it will get there. And that was all I had prepared. Thank you, guys.
So we have had a couple of questions come in.
Awesome.
So one is basically about a child who maybe wakes up and says they've had a bad dream. So my child will leave his bed in the middle of the night and come into my room saying he's having a nightmare and he's afraid and doesn't want to go back to bed. Do you have any recommendations for that scenario?
Yeah, I think it's okay to address that. I mean, it's very common for kids to get a little scared at night. But again, reassure them that they're okay. They're at home, everything's safe, and give them a kiss and leave the room. I wouldn't stay very long. You can provide a little bit of comfort, but they need to go back to bed. It's hard. Nightmares are tricky, but just reassure them, console them a little bit, and then stick to the plan.
Okay, and then one more question. So this is going to that schedule. So the tuck-in schedule, if you find that the interval is too long on the second day, would you revert back to the first day schedule or try to reduce the interval schedule like in half on the second day?
I think it really depends. I might revert back to the first day, especially if day 2 was just really, really awful. Just didn't go well. I would just try to move along and maybe go back to day 1 schedule, but then the next day you're right back on days 2 schedule. I wouldn't stay at day 1 for too long. So maybe if you're trying that and you feel like you're going back and forth, adjust that schedule a little bit. So instead of on the second night, that first visit's at 3 minutes, maybe just do 2 minutes and 30 seconds. You can decrease it a little bit. We will basically want to set our children up for success, and we don't want them getting out of bed. So a little bit of tweaking can happen once you start. I've definitely had plans in place and I've gone over it with the family, and then day one happens and I tweak some stuff. That's okay. But ultimately the basic strategies need to be consistent. So like the strategy of bringing your child back to bed and leaving the room to do that time-based visiting needs to happen. If the times might be a little funky because life happens and things come up, but as long as the strategies themselves are being implemented consistently, there shouldn't be a problem. But a little bit of tweaking here and there is okay.
Okay, we're still getting some more questions, and we've also gotten several thank yous, so thank you very much. I did see a question about the recording, so I will post the recording. You should see it tomorrow, and I'll send you an email with a link to the recording as well. Okay, so one more question. How do we keep the consistency for bedtime with grandparents or babysitters? They can be fine with the bedtime routine when I'm at home, but then waits for me when I'm, out like for a date night or something like that, and throws a temper tantrum to lay down.
That's tricky. That's really hard. I would maybe have an honest conversation with whoever it is that's watching your child about how they need to follow this protocol too. I know with grandparents, it's a little tricky because they might not be able to handle the tantrums the same way that you might be able to, but being really honest, I find, and transparent about what needs to happen and what one bad night can lead to for the next week with people can be really helpful. Have you had this issue, Abby, with your children?
Yeah, my mom lets them do whatever they want. I think the big question is it an issue of the grandparents and sitters not following the protocol, or is it an issue of your child having a massive behavior because you're not there? And then I know it's difficult to expect grandparents and sitters to stick to something like that when a behavior is happening. And I know when my kids' grandparents watch them, sometimes I'm just like, I don't care how many screens they watch. Thank you for a date night. Like, just keep them alive. So, I mean, I think that's a great question. I don't know if you could provide clarification, or Alison, if you want to address both of those scenarios. If it's a grandparent not following it, I'm pretty forward. Well, thanks for all that you guys do. It's really, really important, to us, and we're super thankful. I really would like it if you could try your best to do this, because it makes our life easier when we come home, and then, you don't have to be like the bad guy to your kid. But yeah, Alison, I don't know if you have better advice than I would about if it's the kiddo.
Well, I think too, an important thing to consider is during the actual sleep training process, making sure no one else is putting your children to bed. So making sure that you don't have babysitters during that time. But I can see how, a couple months down the line, sleep training went great. The sleep is pretty much on track. And then having, a slip up one night because somebody else is watching, that's tricky. Again, kind of to piggyback off of what Abby was saying, just be really honest with the person about what it can mean to have one bad night, because just sometimes I think just having that honest conversation is the best, but and also explaining like what can happen. Like if they have one bad night, we might go back to day one of sleep training or day 3. And I can't do that. I'm tired. I cannot go back to that. And just kind of reiterate all the work that you did. As far as having tantrums because mom's not around, that's tricky. I try to have the families I work with that if there's like a little bit of separation anxiety, just reiterating to them that like, hey, grandpa's gonna watch you tonight. I will be back later. You can call me before bedtime if you want and say hi, if that's an option, but like you need to go to bed for grandpa. And just, the tears will sometimes just happen. But they'll eventually go to bed. It might take a little while, but
yeah. I would just say that whenever we've had like a problem because, like I said, I have my kids sleep through the night, but we have definitely had our like, oh, what's going on here? We got to correct this phases. And we've kind of waited until there was like a solid 2 weeks of them doing what they're supposed to do before we try a babysitter. And it stinks. I'm not going to lie. There have been times where like grandparents are in town and we're like, it would be great to have a date night, but we just can't because we have to finish this because we don't want to go back to where we started. But for us, it's always been, if there's been a solid 2 weeks of success, then it's probably okay to try a babysitter. The other thing that like we've been really cognizant of doing is my husband and I making sure that like we both take turns doing the routine. Just because it's kind of like that one more, they're used to not just a single person. It's like, oh, well, sometimes mom does this and sometimes dad does this. So then it's easier to put that third person, that grandparent or that babysitter in the mix than if they're just dependent on mom or they're just dependent on dad. And then it's nice for you because you can have a mom's night, you can have a dad's night because your kid will do the routine for the other one.
And so just to expand, the person who was asking the question said it was like a grandparent, like her mother, but she worries that that their child would be like awake by himself. So maybe like grandparent, also goes to bed, and then they're worried that maybe the child is still awake.
Mhm.
I think that means that the grandmother is worried that the kiddo is awake. Is that correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think that they're worried that their kids are, or maybe keeping the other kids awake. One kid's asleep and one kid's awake, maybe.
Yeah, that's tricky, especially if like kids are sleeping in the same room. I mean, that might be good to implement like a quiet activity that can be done before bed for everybody. But I mean, again, the expectation's the same and you have to stay in bed. You're okay. Mom will be back. Everything's okay. It's just a little different tonight, but you need to go to bed. It's hard. That's a really tricky one.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for asking so many questions. I know this is a hot topic. And so I think we've addressed all the questions that came in. But if anybody else does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box now. I did mention I'll send that follow-up email tomorrow. You're also welcome to reply back to that email if you have other questions. And we're always really happy to help. You can contact us, our phone number is there on the screen, or contact us through Facebook or Instagram at MeBe Family. And join us again for next month. We will do these MeBe learning webinars every month to provide resources for families. So thank you everybody so much for joining us tonight. I don't see any other questions come through. I do see several thank yous though. So thank you to Alison and Abby for providing all that information for us tonight. And I think we will get ready to sign off. So enjoy the rest of your evening and look for that email in your inbox tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Alison.
Of course. Thank you for attending. Have a great night.